Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. It's very exciting to see so many people here connected in the shared Zoom space. There's Kika coming. My name is Katja and I'm the program host of City Makers China Europe program, which is supported by Robert Bosch Foundation. And I have the pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, a virtual cinematic walk with Popo Fan in Berlin. Why are we all here? Well, obviously we have something to celebrate, and we just had the launch of the video project created by Silvan and Popo, and they have inspiration to share with us. And I'm very excited to very soon hear more reflection and dialogue about the video project. I thought to give you a little bit more of context why else we are here tonight, I just want to mention three more reasons, maybe to also set the spirit. So why are we all here? Reason number one, global people connection and global solidarity. The City Makers program is based on the belief that despite we live in very different circumstances in China and in Europe and somewhere else in the world, it's very important to learn from each other, with each other, and to co-create together for livable cities. So City Makers' mission reads, connecting inspired people to co-create livable cities between China, Europe, and beyond. Reason number two, culture and diversity. We believe that next to technological innovation, social innovation, culture is of equal importance for livable cities. We embrace diversity as a fundamental criteria for quality of life in cities. Reason number three, curiosity and openness are fundamental attitudes and values needed for city makers, change makers to cross borders, to co-create new ways of thinking, new ways of doing, new ways of being together. And on that note, the cross borders was the keyword here. I'm very happy to hand over to my collaborator here, Nora Molitor from the Crossing Borders program, because this is a shared project between the City Makers and the Border Crossing programs, both programs for global understanding supported by Robert Bosch Stiftung. Nora, the floor is yours. So a few welcome words from your side to our guests here in the space.
Thanks a lot, Katja. Thank you for this very nice introduction and a lot of keywords which I believe are true for both programs, City Makers and Crossing Borders. Crossing Borders has been a collaboration between Robert Bosch Stiftung and Literarisches Kolloquium Berlin since 15 years. Unfortunately, the Crossing Borders funding, which Fan Popo also received, is not given anymore, but we will have the opportunity to start a series of events and a festival which will take place in September with many, not all of the Crossing Borders funded people, and this festival is called Open Closed Borders GRENZGÄNGER-Festival. So thanks a lot, Katja, thanks more and a lot also to Popo Fan and Silvan to make this event possible. I have to mention that I believe for all of us it was a challenge to relocate the event from a physical space, Neukölln, where I actually am now, to a digital space, and very happy to see so many of us here. Yeah, so I'm welcoming you not only in my position as one of the responsibles of GRENZGÄNGER program or Crossing Borders program, but also as a citizen of Neukölln. And I was very amazed to see this outside or not outside view from the Neukölln I'm actually knowing. And I've been to all the places several times, which you are showing, Popo Fan, in your video or in your cinematic virtual walkthrough. I have to admit that I was at Ficken 3000 only once, and that was when I was depositing a DVD for one of my curator colleagues. So this is maybe the space I didn't explore a lot, but yeah, thanks again for sharing this wonderful film passage whatsoever. And I really, really am curious about the discussion. And I give the word back to you as host to introduce also Carmen Herold and Mo Sun, which are kind of VIP or special guests of this evening.
One technical announcement, thank you, Nora. We will do a recording of this whole session, just to mention that again. It was mentioned in the invitation, but just to let you know, if any of you does not want to appear on the video, please get in touch with us afterwards. But just that you know, we are now recording the session.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Katja, for mentioning that. And thanks, Nora, and my Neukölln citizen fellow. I didn't know that you live in Neukölln. That would be such a long way going to LCV for work. But I'm so glad for the opportunity today, and still very appreciative for crossing border, give me that opportunity to come to Berlin, which obviously changed my life, and also really appreciate like almost 4 years ago I met Silvan in Leipzig, and he introduced me to Katja, and we have been talking a lot about our common knowledge and interest. So it was really great of this collaboration, and also thanks everybody to come here today, especially at this moment. As you all know that we have been, personally I have been checking social medias are overwhelming with about the demonstration and protest globally, which is the issue that I'm also very interested in. But I have this event here, which I think is also important as an echo to the racial issue and class and global political, and under such a special moment with the pandemic of COVID-19. But regarding to the video, and I believe most of you have seen it, but I have to emphasize that in the beginning we're planning real walk in the neighborhood of Neukölln, and taking people around in the neighborhood, enjoying film, food, drinks, and music. So I was super excited that I can treat my friend a trip in my favorite neighborhood with the support from beautiful collaborators. But because of the coronavirus, we have to stay home. And even though German society now is slowly opening up, but it is still not a great idea to go out with a group of people at this moment. Then we decide to make this video, and thanks to my collaborator Silvan. So I would like to bring Silvan here for the first, because I have been talking, you have been hearing me talking for the 26 minutes of the video. So I'd like to bring our guest today. And first it will be Silvan Hagenbrock, who made this beautiful video, and as a cinematographer and also editor. So Silvan, would you like to share with us how do you feel working on this project, and also your understanding about urban space regarding queer and Asian identity?
Hi everyone, thank you Nora, thank Katja, thank you Popo for the introduction, and thank you for this nice cooperation between city makers and LCB and GRENZGÄNGER, and it was a pleasure to work with you, Popo, for the first time on let's say a video which is joining you, portraying you through your personal perspective on your neighborhood, which I'm very interested in. On my background, I'm a bachelor in urbanism from Weimar Bauhaus University, and just finished my master degree at University of Applied Arts in Vienna on so-called social design, and have a focus on film, urban issues, urban topics, and China, since I lived 2.5 years in China, focusing also on urban issues. And during my period in Weimar and Vienna, I used video and photography as a method to grasp ideas of city, to grasp cityscapes. So I produced a bachelor documentary on Addis Abeba, Chinese investments in Africa, and then continued in a video essay for my master program. So long story short, I was very eager to work with Popo on his perspective. Following him with a camera was not easy, walking for a couple of hours through Neukölln, having the first time a gimbal in my hand, since my professional background is not film. So I'm sorry for some not that sharp footage I took, but it was my first time also to do that. But I'm very interested in also doing audio walks, combining urban topics on segregation, on artistic ways to appropriate spaces by individuals, by collectives, to somehow trigger a certain change, to make the city more livable for pedestrians instead of a car-dominant city. So what I feel like about this film, I was very eager to learn from Popo on queer issues, to learn how Popo defines an urban queer city. Let's take this term. And I followed him to these 10, 12 places and totally opened my eyes towards a new Neukölln, since this typical narration of Neukölln, what is it? I don't know. I lived 1 year in Berlin, but I usually not visit so many different places Popo showed me. So I grabbed a very different perspective on Neukölln through Popo's eyes, which I'm very happy to experience it. So basically, the idea behind this film was not having a steady headshot from Popo, and he's explaining the story into the camera. We wanted to have a voiceover, which is a more abstract, a more zooming into his story, and inserting some cinematic footage he produced in the last several years, decade. So a combination of, wow, we have only a facade in front of us concerning the lockdown, and how we can overcome this facade, overcome this yeah, how to say, also the touch doesn't exist so much between different backgrounds, let's say, and how can we overcome, how can we find new alliances, new connections for the queer scene and for other humans. So we wanted to grab this idea of overcoming a facade, this physical structure. So we used also later on the idea to place some close-ups of the material of the facade. We don't want to tell so much. We want to show, let it a little bit abstract, but overcome this through the sense of material, and to use this footage to give a kind of idea of what Popo talking about.
Yeah, you totally helped me to record the day when we were shooting. So also when we were before we started from the recording, and I spent so much time to memorize, to remind me myself about all those stories and memories at different locations. But when we were there, I didn't expect it. There were so many people on the street, and so in the beginning, I think I want to create an atmosphere that's more relaxing. So I didn't want to wear the mask. But in the end, there was so many people on the street, and I didn't feel that comfortable. And also, when your camera also could cut a lot of people wearing the mask, so I decided to wear the mask in the beginning. When we walked to the later location, started to be more relaxing, and I took it off, which is quite a realistic moment of our life in nowadays, and I don't know how long this will exist. But cinematically, I was really surprised by your creativity, and really thanks again for this cooperation. But regarding to collaboration, actually, I just see someone joining us, and Susan, and so we would do you want to say hi to everybody? Because without you, we won't be able to have such a great audio.
Hi.
So, and oh my God, your background totally made my. And would you also explain why you use this background?
It's the Windows background, no? Yeah, the old school Windows, you know, remembering the good old time. I like it. You like it? I can send it to you.
Oh, sorry. I don't worry. I have the photo already, so you you send to me. And thank you again for your creativity on the audio and design, the sound, and your mixing. And would you like to also to share with us your concern on the sound wise? How did you create the urbanist atmosphere from your perspective?
Okay. So yeah, it was. Thank you very much, Silvan and Popo, for inviting me to this project. It was really, really nice experience. Yeah, because I also lived in Berlin, like just next to this area. I lived in Kreuzberg, and now because of the circumstance, a lot of different issues, I'm now in Munich. But yeah, like making this film really like reminds me of a lot of nice, you know, like Berlin time in my life. Regarding to the film, I think when I was putting my hands on it, I was and also from this idea of Silvan, we were more. Oh, Krista, hi. I was more focusing on in Popo's mind, because I think this trip would make sense. It like because the experience would have been people following Popo, so I wanted to like emphasize this in the film with sound. Because with the visual, you see Popo, you see Popo constantly in the camera, but it would be interesting also because that Popo has all these monologue. It would be interesting to kind of hear the space in the story of Popo's words, like in Popo's story. So that was the idea of making all these the atmosphere, and also to play with the space. Sometimes it is like a background music, and then sometimes it could jump as if it is in the frame, as if the music is in the frame. I don't know if I could explain it so like well, because it's all kind of a bit abstract, you know. It's also kind of in my mind.
I think people all get it when watching the film, because you put so much effort into creating, especially when we were talking about nightlife. So we realize, well, we go to the location, nothing is opening at all. But with that sound, people can feel what could be, what it used to be, and hopefully what will be.
Yeah.
So. I will go to, had the microphone to the next speaker. Actually, she's the expert of nightlife and multiple talented, doing her PhD of philosophy in the same time organizing a lot of the event, and including film festival and also nightlife. And Carmen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be able to participate tonight. And although I think it's very flattering that you think I do a PhD of philosophy, I have to correct you. I'm currently finalizing my master's degree in cultural science or cultural theory, but I will go on for an exchange in New York. But yeah, I guess actually how we met was mainly through film, because at the time I was still working for the Goethe Institute in Beijing, and I was curating and programming, organizing the film festivals there. And yeah, and then later on I decided to co-open, because that's kind of my other passion, music, co-open a nightclub which is called Chai.China-Filmfestival. Or Jiaodai, just simple as that in English, which is in Beijing. So I'm currently based in Berlin, but also kind of, if it's not Corona and not a Corona situation, I'm also half of the other year based in Beijing. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry for making that mistake, because
No.
I think in my mind you're already PhD according to how much knowledge you have.
That's very flattering. No.
And you had created this famous important queer party in Beijing called Donggong Xigong. Would you like to share why do you want to create that this party, and how is the space look like?
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, basically when we opened the place, one of our first ideas was that we wanted to do a queer party, which I always have an issue actually with calling it queer party, because I think the whole idea behind this event is to kind of terminize the idea of gender and kind of go beyond that border, and kind of, you know, kind of not kind of break with the idea that femininity belongs to women and masculinity belongs to men, and kind of in a way, as I said, ending gender. And as you said, the party is called Donggong Xigong, which is a very, very famous gay movie from China. And in English it would be East Palace, West Palace. And I think it's not just a party also, it's kind of, it also, again, it goes beyond that. It's also a community where we do workshops and we do certain other events that are kind of always before or after the parties. So like for instance, we did a couple of workshops with on transgenderism, and we also did a workshop with drag queens on drag performances, and kind of creating this community of people that are seeking for a different space. I also kind of want to refrain from the word safe space, but it was kind of, we kind of thought of it as being, in a way, a safe first space at least. Because we definitely think that talking about urbanism also, that spaces in general is a huge issue in China, or especially in Beijing. There's so little space for individuals. And I think it's very, very difficult to kind of break out of your individual space and kind of find sexual liberation. And also because a lot of public spaces are, I mean, there's not really festivals or anything. So like, and also like public affection is not really seen very often, especially when it's like a homosexual relationship. So these type of half public spaces are even more important. And I think that was kind of one of the big ideas behind creating this event. Giving a space beyond the usual space. These kids they're often extremely young that come to the club also, some of them not even 20. So they come to our space because often they live in dormitories with 6 people, or they live at home, and that's where they can, you know, be sexually liberated.
And I have to confess that I spent, I had so much good times at Jiaodai. So if you have a chance to visit Beijing, that's a place you have to be. And also I really it's a shame that it's only opened when I almost moved to Berlin. So I missed. I wish when I was living in Beijing, there is such a space so I can hang out more there. But recently, I also have been to your event in Berlin. You have been doing also very involved with exchange of culture between these two cities regarding to nightlife and music. And how did you see the connection or what is nightlife means to those two cities and under such a globalized situation?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Generally, I think there's definitely a very transnational element to club in general. So like when you go to any place in this world, I think at this point, parties look very similar, especially when it comes to queer parties. It's not like what you had in the early 80s or in the early 70s in Chicago, where queer parties were kind of the Wild West, where you don't have these perfectly curated queer nights as you have today. You know, like today, if you go to a club and you go to a queer night, then you have people that make sure that you're okay, or the bouncers will tell you, well, if you feel sexually harassed or something, you can always come to us. So there's all of this perfectly curated night already presented to you, which in the past was not the case. And I think this is something that is very similar in a lot of different places. And I think for that, club culture is definitely very transnational. But then, of course, on the other side, you also have your local specificities. Like, for instance, in China, if sex is subject to censorship, then it has a different political urgency, obviously. So like if you go to a club naked in China, as opposed to going to a club naked here, then it has a very, very different urgency. And I think this is something we kind of hope with this project also to shed light on. So we did like a club exchange with the infamous About Blank Club in Berlin. And we kind of invited the core team from the Berlin club to Beijing, and then some of our DJs and or people that were affiliated with the club came to Berlin last year, and I don't know, as I said, I think we kind of found out that there's a lot of similarities, but then again there's local differences which they're very interesting to look at, and I think it's just created a lot more common understanding. And I don't know, it's what's really cool about nightlife in general is also that it's a huge network. So I think that's something, especially if we talk about solidarity, maybe later on again, or about, you know, cultural differences or cultural identity, which is kind of like the most used term nowadays, I feel. I think this is something in nightlife that is extremely interesting, because nightlife has always, at least the underground, the so-called underground, has always had this self-understanding of being a global network, which is based on solidarity. And I think especially Corona has shown that this is, if you activate this network, that it's extremely, extremely successful. Because, for instance, clubs that are closed in China, they will not hope for any money coming from the state, as opposed to Berlin, you know, where like a lot of clubs now, they get state funded just to survive, versus in China, that's something you obviously can't really expect. But a lot of the people here are enabling financial aids to these clubs in China now, which I think is really great.
Yeah, you totally remind me talking about like club and sex and body or whatever we say. I remember I went to a club with two female friends of mine, and they were saying, oh, why this actually to a queer club and queer party, and they were saying, oh, these women are so ignored here. And I said I did something I can't say what judge myself, but I was saying, you know what, if you take off your t-shirt and the club belongs to you. Everybody will you will occupy the space by this behavior, and so they were topless. And in the beginning, because the dance floor was so crowded, nobody noticed. And until there were two gay men look at their they're two big boobs, and oh my god, so they freak out. And in the end, they were taken by the security. Had to was asked to put on their t-shirt. So imagine this, if this happens in a club in Berlin, that is unbelievable, and it will be such scandal that blah blah club doesn't allow women to be topless. So totally the opposite of effect. But on the other hand, and being also for me, and later on our next panelist, is a question that being as you as person has Asian descent, and a lot of and also the Asian community has been also growing bigger and bigger, and how we can see racial issues in club. Like especially when a lot of places also have a door policy, they can choose people who can get in or not, and it was always very controversial. How is there? Do you see there is race discrimination or xenophobia based on skin color in the club culture on this side?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that there's always the potential, at least. And I think that's why it's wrong to talk of clubs as being safe spaces, because I think it's a utopian idea, which I just don't see. No matter how good your door policy is, you will never live up to the ideal. So I think you can only do so much, right? Like, I mean, I think if you have a certain, or if you share certain values that you bring to the idea of an underground club, which very much so includes the idea of having, you know, like a non-homophobic, non-xenophobic space, which is basically the primary idea of what nightclubs were when they started, in that sense, at least in Chicago and Detroit or New York, and then later on Berlin, Amsterdam, and Paris and London. I think if you speak of, I mean, because as you said, there is obviously also these large discos, commercial clubs where this is not necessary, where this is not a thing, you know, this is not in their cultural understanding or in their identity. And so I think if a certain club has this idea of a club being that, then, well, then I think that's the best you can do, and I think you should do it as well as you can. But I've seen it before. I also seen it in our club. But we always tell every guest that comes to our club at the door, we have this door policy that everyone needs to read before entering the club. So whenever someone feels harassed, they can always go to our bartenders or go to our staff and be like, hey, I feel harassed, or like I don't feel safe, like can you please help me out? Like, at least we have this type of service. But I know like most clubs in China don't, because most clubs have a commercial agenda, and that's obviously then very different. But I think this is what clubs initially at least stood for me or stand for me. So I will definitely defend this idea of a club.
Thank you, Carmen. And I also have to mention that Jiaodai also have a collaboration with NGOs such like Beijing LGBT Center, and doing fundraising for their administration. So the next guest I want to bring is Mo Sun. Actually, he used to work for such an organization, and now living in Berlin. I remember when I went to Mo Sun's, I call him Momo. So I went to Momo's farewell party, and he told me he's moving to Berlin. And I was saying, you know what, we don't need to say goodbye for a long time, because 2 months later, I'm also going there. So I can now hand the microphone to Momo. And would you like to introduce yourself at first?
Hello, hey. Microphone working? Yeah, hey.
We can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Hey everyone. Hey, Carmen. Sun. I see some friends here. Yeah, thanks Popo and City Makers inviting me for this event. Actually, I'm always for this period is currently at home. I feel like I haven't seen so much people for a while. Yeah, as Popo mentioned, I was actually we met from the Beijing LGBT Center actually in 2014. Which at that time I started to work for the this Beijing local organization called Beijing LGBT Center, service for the LGBT rights and healthy service. And I worked as their first media manager in Beijing from 2014 to 2016. And from the media side, of course, in China, I think everyone knows that LGBT issue still is kind of like a censored topic. So as a media work, especially when you want to promoting the LGBT information or our events, is still very difficult and facing no matter censorship or self-censorship. And you can see we experienced a lot together actually with Popo. I still remember in 2016, you went to this independent film festival in Songzhuang. Actually, it's a art village developed to a small town outside of the city in the suburban. And we did you did a kind of like a private screening. It's part of the film festival, but I remember at very next year in 2017, the whole festival got censored. And so as myself, also because of Popo's case, I did a film. I produced a film called Block and Censor, focused on this censorship based on Popo's case about the censorship related to LGBT issues, but also not only the LGBT issue, because we see that LGBT rights is also part of the human rights. So we wanted to dig a little bit deeper and to talk more in the whole human rights scope. Of course, this film cannot be screened in China, and also Popo's film. So yeah, so this background, I chose this background as this Kino International. They have this program every the first Monday of every month. They have this gay film night, and also this street, the Karl Marx Alley. This you can see it's a Sui style buildings. It's actually very similar with the Chang'an Street in Beijing. They both shared this ideology, the communism ideology at that time, but right now, of course, with totally different scenario.
Yeah, to aid for Momo's speech is that and I had to lawsuit with to the Chinese government of the censorship department because they banned my film, and so Momo produced a documentary about it, which really helped me because every time people ask me want me to narrative the whole story from the beginning, I feel so exhausted. Then I just say, oh, you know what? Could you give me a link, your email? I can send you a link of a documentary made up by a friend. So I really saved a lot of energy. I think. Thank you, Momo. And in the same time, I want to tell the audience that we're going to open the microphone to everybody soon, so you can later you can already prepare your question either by texting your question to the chatting group or raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you unmute yourself to speak and to raise your question. So the next question to Momo is that since you have been to both of the city, Beijing and Berlin, how do you see the similarity and different of the queer life here, especially as you know, we share a lot of common situation as queer Asian person and perhaps also male come to such a city, and what is this identity playing in your as a role in your life?
Yeah. So in the beginning, when you mentioned that farewell party, so I moved to Berlin in 2017, and then so it's the third year here. And my friends was like, "Oh well, you're going to the gay capital," you know, like it's kind of applying like sexual, liberal, like crazy, sexy parties, whatever. And well, actually, what I want to say is that somehow for this part, of course, I really enjoyed and I liked, and we went together to these parties, of course, in the beginning, and as kind of like research and developing, discovering the city. And but for me, actually, even when I was in Beijing, as actually Carmen mentioned, that in Beijing there is still the queer parties and nightclubs for gay people to go, and there are queer events organized by no matter Beijing LGBT Center or other organizations. So if I was lucky, of course, but still there were spaces and there were opportunities for gay people to have their gay life, even in Beijing. So to be fair, actually, I was very when you not think about the rights part, when you don't want to think about, oh, what if I want to get married or blah blah, you still have kind of you can have a comfortable life actually as a gay man. And so for that part, it's actually when I come to Berlin, is the I always want to say that I really feel like mentally relaxed and chill down, and you don't actually have to every day like to think about like, and also maybe because I was working for the organization, I don't have to actually every day think about like, oh, which article or which film gets censored, and it's here you kind of have a of course better rights situation, but I still want to remind everyone that even in Germany, in Berlin, it's still two years ago in 2017 that the federal law adopted the same-sex marriage act. So it still has a lot to do, and also I want to say that it's not only in Berlin. It's like, oh, we have really we have good nightlife, so we have the rights, but still, you know, it's the whole LGBT globally is I want to remind us, it's a big family, that we cannot only celebrate our own life in this, I want to say maybe it's a bubble. So still in Middle East, in South Asia, in Russia, in South America, we still have a lot to do, of course, in China as well. And I was lucky to also get involved in one project for the Game Memorial in the Tiergarten. There's a small memorial opposite of the Holocaust Memorial. And so if you go there right now to see this small memorial, there's a window. You can see 4 people kissing, 2 girls and 2 guys. I was lucky to be one of the guys, and to memorize, of course, what happened during the Nazi time, but actually it's not a long time ago, and the memorial, I saw the news last year. The memorial was vandalized, so someone kind of did some bad things to the memorial. So it still reminds us it's not really like perfect or like 100% safe space for everyone. And even in Berlin, we see a lot of friends are living in Neukölln, Kreuzberg, but since I moved to Berlin because of work, I live in Prenzlauer. I actually feel like ashamed to see that. Maybe it's the most boring area in Berlin. Even there was a gay party every Thursday close to my place, and then later it moved to urban spray to the side circles. So if I want to go to a gay party, or I still have to travel to maybe Neukölln, maybe Kreuzberg. And always like a lot of friends are even they invite me to go to something like feel exciting, it's always in Neukölln. But every time if I go back to Beijing, I still visit Beijing LGBT Center. It's always, I feel like it's part of my life, and also I still see them as a family. So right now, actually, their situation is getting more and more difficult, and they are still struggling to survive. Yeah, still a lot of things to do, I guess.
Momo, every time you told me that, I live in, firstly, we love you, we don't discriminate you because you live in Prenzlauer. And secondly, every time you told me, I need to go to Neukölln, sounds like going to another city. It's just half an hour by U8. So I think we were spoiled by the city signs of Berlin. Somehow I know this city is very divided, but somehow you remember when we were in Beijing, sometimes we want to go to a party, you have to travel 2 hours, or go to an event, go to an exhibition, you need to go from Guomao to Wudao, then such a even one taking line 10, but it's 1 hour and a half of trip all the way go there. But let's say Berlin, globally now there is also this space. But forgive me if you don't want to answer on whatever, and which is the online space look like for gay dating and love, because I remember the first time when I when I travel back to Beijing, and after living here for only a couple of months, everybody was asking how's your sex life in Berlin? How are the guys there? So I was like, oh my God, come on! I'm doing seriously my research, and you don't want to make me look like I was only having fun and having sex there. Of course, I have sex there, but it's not the whole life of me. Do you feel like sometimes Berlin is kind of overwhelming for sex? But on the other side, how is that for you? How is this topic, if you don't mind to share?
Well, yeah, actually, as I mentioned previously, like it's kind of all the friends I imagine that you have this crazy sex life over there. Well, I have to say, even I was in Beijing, I have a good sex life. So, here, it really remind me one thing that maybe a little bit exaggerated, but like there was one guy who holding a sign in the subway saying that looking for a serious relationship. Maybe that somehow give us perspective to think about like how is our gay life or sex life here. Is I feel actually here more maybe we have more awareness of individuality and self-confidence and also the independency. So somehow I feel like and the understanding about the relationship and the marriage. So what do you need to be in a relationship, or or how do you understand from each other's view? So I feel like while I was in Beijing, actually everyone was more talking about relationships or how is their struggle in the relationships. And it's more like maybe because also from part of our tradition values that finally you need to find someone maybe to spend the rest of life together, and or like at least find someone to take care of each other and to also share the responsibility. But somehow we, especially as a queer people, we have more understanding or more multiple divine understanding about relationships, and how do you define or define, or how do you the how, like we kind of maybe have better abilities to separate sex and love and relationships maybe.
Thank you. This totally remind me a few days ago. A friend of mine told me, he said the golden sentence is, "Oh, guys here in Berlin are easy to be fisted than be kissed." This is a little bit extreme, but somehow it's really I can see from to that direction. And but thank you for your share, Momo. So we already have a few questions here. So there is one to comment from X. Question to come: what do you think about the future of Beijing queer clubs, since many of them got affected by the COVID, and will they be able to go back to normal? Carmen?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I don't think anything will go back to normalcy actually in China at the moment, and I think it's a romantic idea, because I think part of the reason nightlife has been such an important space for queer communities, especially in China, is because it was under the radar. So like nightscapes and generally in China weren't as much under censorship, just because the music that's played in the clubs has no text, right? So like it's not subject to censorship. And the other point is that when people go out at night, there's just a lot less surveillance. But with Corona, I felt like this is now a carte blanche for like a lot more surveillance. So for instance, just with this app now where people are tracked, which is supposedly, you know, for health benefits. But like every time you go to a club now, like you have to check in with this app. And so basically you're traceable at all times. And I think this is a huge issue. And I wish this would be more, or this would be more, you know, taken seriously, or this would be more in the center of attention. Because I think it not only affects nightclubs, or it not only affects queer communities, and it really affects everyone right now in China. And I think so this is a huge problem, and I think queer spaces in general will definitely be not so much maybe under political attack, which I also think is kind of an important point for me, that I think most youth in China craving for liberation is not from political oppression, but a lot more from demanding cultural traditions or high expectations on them individually. I think this is maybe to a certain degree for queer communities or for Chinese youth a much larger problem. And I think this is often forgotten, or maybe this is a misunderstanding. But I think that political oppression, of course, is also a huge problem. But I think when it comes to your own cultural identity, I would say that certain cultural traditions are a lot more scrutinizing.
But as most specifically, what's the plan for Zhao Dai, and when are you planning to open it? And
yeah, good question. Yeah, so we've been hoping actually we could reopen after Lianghui, which is not happening, as we found out yesterday. Actually, most clubs in China have reopened in March already, but Beijing is always kind of a special place when it comes to that. So we've been waiting all the time, and we don't really, we didn't get any news lately. So it's a very precarious situation for us at the moment. And as you mentioned earlier, also with East Palace, West Palace being a fundraiser event, a lot of spaces that we've worked with are kind of also counting on us, but we simply can't really do it at the moment. So this is definitely a big problem. And I've talked to some of the girls from this one feminist space that were like, look, if we don't get any funds anytime soon, then we have to close. So it's kind of all connected, you know. If one space is not open and can't raise funds, then other spaces are immediately affected too.
Yes, thank you. There is another question to me, actually, Popo, a question for later. In your movie, you're talking about Asian queer identity. Could you talk a bit more about this, how you see different from a Western queer identity? And two questions to follow, if possible. Would Asian queer identity in general be a right term too broad, and using the Western approach of coming out loud, suitable to the Chinese family society? From Oliver. Oh my God, this question is so Oliver, and I want to briefly react to that. Actually, I didn't have this. I think Berlin gave me this opportunity to have the Asian identity, and of course, I've been always having the Chinese identity, but it was not an identity when I was in China, and being Asian is even less in my mind about of this identity, because the majority there is Chinese, is people who are let's say the same color of me. But when I moved here, one thing I was still very impressive that when I go to, since Berlin has a bigger, the Asian community here, and the biggest one is Vietnamese community. There is a big Vietnamese market in east of Berlin. When I go there, I feel like, oh my God, I'm in home. So you won't be able to understand that if I go to a Vietnamese market in Beijing, feeling home. It is because at least I have buy a lot of food materials there, and which you don't see in the German supermarket. And I get my haircut monthly there. Actually, most of the German or Turkish barber doesn't understand how my hair feels like. Most of them doesn't cut it correctly, and then I realized this identity has, because I'm in another country, I had to build up this identity for me. In the video, I also talked that actually a lot of young migrants and new migrants here that don't feel this, because they let's say maybe they are post identity politics, so they don't have to put this label on them. It was also very struggling for me myself, because honestly I'm not a big fan of identity politics. But when you every time it is only all those encounters forced me to have this strong feeling that I need to tell them that I am queer and I am Asian and I'm in such a city. There is still a lot of problems. So we had already featured today and also at this panel in the video. And I feel only when this voice is really needed, and at this point also how much solidarity we should have to support each other when Asian community need to be to have a more understanding with the Middle Eastern community here, with the Black community here, with the migrant workers here. And therefore, actually, after my 2 times racial insult here, both from other migrants' backgrounds, I was very fascinated of how come this is happening once after another. And so, but also this authority seemingly didn't do anything well to improve it. And in the same time, I saw so many of my Asian and Chinese fellow was saying, "Oh, that guy is Middle Eastern. That guy is a poor person. Is a migrant himself. That's why he's discriminating you." But is that the correct way to just express that? And so, therefore, I always finding way to do anything from my perspective. So later on this year, I'm planning a series of a screening with a space here in Berlin of the Chinese and the Middle Eastern crossover program, because those two communities are both in a uprising in German society, but somehow you don't see many chances they can see each other. There is opportunity for us to meet. So that's why I still feel it's not about to come out loud. It's really about when the voice is weak, and I need to be there and to tell people to emphasize our exist. So another, there are a few other questions. I think we can all try to give feedback. And Hongwei was asking, the style of your film seems to have changed after went to Beijing from Berlin. What's this major change and why? Firstly, I switched from more experimental and fictional movie from a documentary since 2006. There was a decision made in 2006 because 2016, because I was feel a little bit tired of my documentary filmmaking. And on the other side, also I want to contribute to the queer films with different and more creative ways. And secondly, as I said, after I moved to Berlin, I realized there is a lot of things I can do here regarding to the Asian identity and the community here. And next question from Andrew Stokos in Boston. Wondering the future of queer space, not just in relations to censorship, but also pressures in the cities like Boston, where are declining queer space due to online apes and gentrification and turn toward homogeneous, normative ideals of queer life as increasingly revolving around marriage, home ownership, child rearing, etc. So this is a question maybe we can all react to. Oh my God, and this question is also so Andrew from a perspective of a urbanist friend in Boston. Momo, do you want to, and Silvan, anyone want to?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously, censorship is just one issue. I absolutely agree that, of course, if we talk about especially urbanism, and especially in China, where by 2030, 70% of all of Chinese population will be living in urban spaces. And that's not even cities, that's like mega hubs where people will be living. Gentrification is a huge issue, especially after the Olympics. Gentrification basically killed a lot of independent spaces, not just queer spaces, but just in general, a lot of independent spaces. I think like those who are more familiar with China are very familiar with the infamous Chai sign that was written all over Beijing or in a lot of spaces in China, which signaled that buildings will be teared down. Yeah, this is a huge problem.
Momo.
Yeah, talk about gentrification. Carmen mentioned about Beijing. We shared that moment to demolishing and gentrification of Hutong areas, and we have to when we're talking about queer spaces, actually in Beijing, especially, I feel like somehow we have very strong connections from queer space and art spaces, like especially in Berlin. Actually, there are a lot of freelance artists and queer artists. Somehow, I'm feeling like queer people, we have more sense about art. And back to Beijing, and we always say that artists make a place nicer, and then the real estate comes. So, for example, the 798, it was a factory, and then artists comes and build galleries and studios, and then right now it's becoming like how to say, like cafes and restaurants. No real artists left over there. And then the Songzhuang art town like is also getting demolishing. Here in Berlin,
is this not like also a very political? Sorry, is this not a very political strategy also? Like, for instance, if you look at 7 and 8 or Songzhuang, like these places, they fill them with cafes and good-looking, nice bars and these designer shops. And this is very strategic, right? Like they commercialize these places so that art just looks as decoration. It's decorative. It's not. It's kind of ripped off this entire artistic or critical potential. And I think again, this is extremely politically motivated. And yeah, sorry, go on. But I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, you're right about that, because gentrification is like when the rentings are getting higher and the artists cannot avoid that cannot affording the rentings, they have to move out. Actually, it's like the same here, even in Berlin, even slowly. As I mentioned, there was a gay club, but moved to urban space. Urban Spree from Prince Lorbeck. I actually remind me one famous quote from the previous the former Berlin mayor. I don't remember his name. He said that Berlin is armer, aber sexy. Like Berlin is poor but sexy. So we see that Berlin, the urban gentrification is almost impossible to avoid following the urban development. So I think especially queer people, we have more deep understanding about coexist, no matter with others, but also with environmental. We are more environmental friendly also. So somehow when you see Popo's background, like it's where it is, actually it's a suburban of Berlin, and it's also it's that lake. It's that side of the lake.
Greenwald. It's next to Teufelsee.
Yeah. It's a part of, we see the queer space also. But I'm very glad that we have that space in such a city. So it's of course it's very difficult in Beijing. I don't see such a places at all, and but I want to say that it's also urban queer space. Somehow this kind of this conception has also self-conflicts somehow. Like when we talk about queer space, the urban space is like somehow a little bit conflict with the queer living environmental I don't know how to put it, but like I feel like queer people, we have really more understanding about the coexist with different culture people and with others, and more environmental friendly. And we want to create the space not only for commercials, but also more culture friendly. Yeah, I guess that's what I want to say.
Actually, if there anyone want to also give their opinion and feedback on this topic, from the audience, if so, please raise your hand. Actually, I also had the idea that the reason why I pick up this background was because it is somehow an urban space, but quite unique to Berlin, and it is a green wild where behind it was FKK and cruising space. And I don't know if you can see that. Actually, I have there is a naked body on this side, and behind that a similar situation of sand and desert, where you can people can meet each other in the actual space. There are still quite a few places like this in Berlin, no matter in the city or suburb exist. Which the reason why I choose it, because we have been talking so much about urban space and queer space today, but unfortunately, because the idea of walking in a certain neighborhood, we won't be able to walk here because it's about 15 kilometers from where I live, and but there is another place not far from where I live in Heisenhead, and there is a naked beach, and behind it is a forest that people can cruising. But I heard the cruising is slowly resuming now. People still started to get body touchment with each other, but just a few weeks ago, because of coronavirus, and I heard they had created this space that there will be people, two people about 1 meter away with each other and masturbating with, and that is new type of cruising. So which I found is when those online space won't be able to, maybe you can do like online sex or whatever, but this won't create such a atmosphere. And still I think the offline space is still very, very unique. And if no one raising hands, and there are actually two questions. Next two questions are quite similar with each other, and about communication and loneliness. So AK, would you like to read yourself, or you want me to read for you instead? And also Hongwei. So questions about, so AK's question, in Popo's video, there is a strand of thought about the difficulty of communication or sociability in Berlin. Would you like to elaborate on that? And Hongwei's question, since in your video, you talk about the loneliness and longing for connection in the city during lockdown. How do you cope with the feeling? And you have any suggestion for overcoming the feeling? Actually, I would like to mention about one thing happened in the video, actually at the very end of the video, when I was sitting in front of a loophole. There was one person passed by the video, by the camera, and he suddenly come close to me and wanted to be in the frame and take a picture together with me. But of course, that was about 2 weeks ago, and I was still very paranoid about getting human connection, and I had this very resuming action automatically almost, and afterward I really appreciate that Silvan added this into the video, And after I saw the video, wow, he's kind of cute, and why I was having that behavior. So this make me feel that how long it will take. We all recover already a city for me with a certain atmosphere of loneliness. Moreover, with this COVID-19, and how can we recover from that? And just question for me and also many people. Does anyone? So there is another question from Alan. Alan, would you like to ask yourself? Okay, I read for you. Hi, Carmen. I moved from Beijing to Berlin in 2018. I like your presentation, but I didn't follow your comment about Radisson identity very well when you answered one question about future of Zhao Dai. Is it possible you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to, but I'll just try to answer it anyways. Well, I think when I look at Zhao Dai, or especially the people that come to Zhao Dai, I usually envision a young person, which is really the prevailing audience that is coming to our club, as opposed to what you have here. Maybe I think the age gap is much wider here as opposed to in China. And I think generally what really interests me is this new generation, this new youth that is growing up in China now, which is kind of this post-90s generation. So like in China, for those who don't know, what we usually would call millennials, people that were born between the 80s and 2000s, in China is divided in generations by decades. So it's post-50s, post-60s, and so on. And so the post-90s generation is possibly the first generation ever that is less preoccupied with needs and more involved with wants. And I think this is something that is really interesting to me. And I think it really translates into how people go out, how people are looking into alternative cultures as opposed to the dictate, the political dictate. So a lot of these young people also, because China is still an education society, so like a lot of these young Chinese, they study abroad, especially in the US. I think 1/3 of all foreign students in US are Chinese now, which is a huge amount of young Chinese people being educated outside of China. And so they come back to China, and I think a lot of them, when they've got acquainted with, certain culture or certain freedoms, then that's what they're looking for. And I would say this is most of the people that come to our club, like people that won't accept a mainstream idea of culture or won't accept a certain political agenda. And it's listening to a certain type of music, wearing a certain type of dress, or drinking a certain type of beer is always politically motivated, I think. And it's always a certain type of resistance, as an aesthetic resistance. And I think this is something which defines identity a lot, which in the end actually also defines the idea of nation at all, because I think any cultural idea is kind of adding up to what a nation state is also. It's not just a political entity, it's also a cultural entity. So anything that exists culturally in China is also kind of adding to the idea of the nation and adding to what identity this nation has. So I think, and I just looking at the numbers of like how many new clubs evolved just in these last 2 years, how many new parties, how many new DJs, how many people who search the alternative. I think this is, for me, extremely obvious that people are starting to really be more outspoken about other types of culture. And that's, I think, is very, very interesting. And it will ultimately also change China massively in the future.
Oh, thanks. And actually, sorry, I missed one question from Raju. He was asking, would you, about how differently to do Beijing and Berlin by design make the queer community invisible. How differently do Beijing? Raju, would you like to explain? Is that from an urban design perspective, or?
Yeah, hi Popo.
Yeah.
I loved your film. It was very honest, and the making. I think I really loved the way the camera followed in the city, so you feel like a first person experience when you're watching it. Thank you for that. It was an amazing, very well made and very honest. I think, especially your narration and all, very honest. So my question was, I think, and you're right. One is especially from the perspective of urban design itself, and especially how Berlin has evolved as a city, where the design, its roots of its design and all. And that is one urban design, and other also in terms of culturally, like why does something has to be underground, or why does something become an underground phenomena, not a mainstream phenomenon? Why does some clubs or some cultural spaces become exclusive as such? Because I mean, for the lack of space in the so-called the normal or mainstream spaces, they end up becoming underground. That's why, from that perspective, that was a question. And in terms of, because you have lived in both these cities, so I just wanted to know that.
Yeah, I think I still see this question more from the political perspective, because imagine a country in a city like Beijing and still under such authority, and it will be very hard. I remember, as you can see from the beginning of the video, Silvan edited into the video of a New Beijing New Marriage. That was that film made in 2009. And we, besides doing the documentary, I was also co-organizer for that activity. That we managed to have a wedding picture, same-sex wedding picture, taken on the street, and at the time and until now, marching on the street for any purpose, unless they allowed it, like anti Japan parade or some other nationalism activities, but normally you won't see any of this kind of visibility. But we played with a loophole that we managed the same taking wedding picture. So we'll even have a strategy that if the police come to take us, we will make them into two straight couple, because there are two girls and two men. And this activity, we want to continue to hold it in Beijing the following years. But then you find then we find even we communicate with each other only on phone, and we talk about details only face to face. Still, we will find the next few years, we already found that where we are going to hold the event. There was one year we tried to have, there was a kissing contest, and in a shopping mall in Beijing, and we had to encourage two people to actually two same-sex couples to submit for the kissing contest, and they didn't mention who their partners are. But still, in the end, the whole kissing contest of the shopping mall was shut down, and then later on we discovered somebody posted on Chinese social media Weibo saying that the police shut down the whole kissing contest because they know there will be some same-sex couple be part of it. So imagine in this situation, and the following years, we could not do anything like that anymore. And also the media there were more censorship on media too. I remember in 2009 when that event was out, it's really covered by a lot of mainstream Chinese media. But in 2015, when I had my lawsuit, the first day I was interviewed by many people, spent a whole day answering the phone from journalists. But in the end, all of them told me we got censored. So they censored a case, a report about a case against censorship. And this I believe will be happening more and more. You can see generally not only LGBT NGOs are suffering that, the whole civil society has been facing a lot of a challenge against them. Do we have more questions to? Oh, so here we have Hongwei. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask this? I think this probably will be our last question. But Hongwei here got a question for Carmen. Would you say it yourself?
Okay. Well, hello. I'm not sure if you can see me, but hello, Carmen. Thanks for sharing your experience about Beijing. I agree with you that the younger generation today seems to be more nationalistic and politically oriented, as you have suggested. But I was wondering if you could say something about whether there is any hope or whether there is any exception, and if those young people are so nationalistic, is there any future?
That's actually a good point. Yeah, I think I was basically more talking about a generation. It's basically what I always try to also show people by the example of club or night clubbing is that the Chinese society is obviously not homogeneous. So especially the younger generation is not a homogeneous society. So there's obviously those that are more discussed in media nowadays, which are those that are seemingly more nationalistic or eaten up by a certain political brainwash. And then there's those who are the opposite or who simply don't care. I mean, I also see that there's a lot of political indifference, which doesn't necessarily equal to not being political or not acting political. But I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm also moving in a field where I see a lot more resistance than opposed to other mainstream society. Like the people I work with or I hang out with are people that work in the arts and cultures, or people that are musicians. And these people all have a very strong political agenda. And those people also have a very strong urge to be resistant, but it's not, and I think this is a huge misunderstanding in the West often, it's not this type of active political activism that we know from the West. It's a specifically low threshold type of resistance, which I was also kind of pointing out earlier, or calling aesthetic resistance. I think that's a type of resistance I see really hope in, because there is certain disciplinary measures if you go in the street, because it's simply forbidden. But I do believe that by just living out the other, or just living out something that is opposed to your family traditions or what is politically accepted, I think this is already potentially, a very, very interesting type of resistance, which will hopefully change or make changes in the future. So maybe I'm romanticizing it also, but I really truly hope in that.
Well, it's nice to have hope, isn't it? I like the term of aesthetic resistance, and I also share the hope and optimism.
Yeah,
yes.
me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I missed I had to ask another question. I don't know if we still have time for another question. So would you like to, I see you had another question earlier. I missed it.
Is that me or somebody else?
You there was a lot of racist.
Yeah, if you give me the chance to ask another question, I will ask questions about your private, intimate life. In one of your blogs, that you published in Chinese and translated into other languages. You talked about your intimate experience during the epidemic. So could you elaborate more about it, and how do you, or what is your suggestion about people who long for intimacy and sex?
Actually, because we are running out of time, I can only be very brief. Which I also talk a little bit in the video, and now I'm drinking this wine, so it maybe helps a little bit, because actually I found in Berlin, and there is so much people, so like the image of Berlin had been really sexualized, and so that's why I was when I was but in the opposite, Beijing doesn't have this sexy image. So that's why when I was making the Hutong Wife, I said I want to shoot a porn in Beijing, because people never really think it is sexy usually, and also on the feature about the Asian body in a different way, and not a stereotype of body, of stories of sex I have been seeing before. So that will be artistic wise my plan for the next few years, and doing films about sex positive but Asian bodies in Europe, and especially in a city like Berlin. And I also so it will be how to say, but but in the same time, it's just not easy, because people already have their very deep stereotype, and how can we break this? And it will be a long way to go. So and I really appreciate everybody was together with me of this trip, and got so much support from different people and community. So.
Thank you.
And I think we also need to wrap up now. But our panelists, do we still have anything to add? Silvan, Carmen, Momo, and
I wanted to thank you again for this very kind invitation. And,
thank you. Thank you for joining us, and your great knowledge and feedback on these questions and the topic of today.
Sure.
And Katya and Nora, do you have any sentence to share? Oh.
Also a big thank you for everything. I mean, this amazing film and the discussion.
Okay, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today again. And I'm going to enjoy my wine now. I hope you also enjoy your night. And
thank you all. Yeah, I just unmuted myself. I just want to thank you by also sharing 3 keywords that just came to my mind, and 2 were voiced out. I think honesty, hope, and there is an underlying thing that I think shines through is depth of dialogue. And I want to thank everybody for the openness to share here. I had been working in Sino international dialogue for 20 years, and it was always my wish that we could go deeper and deeper with sharing and understanding. And tonight was for me a really nice example of that we can do this if we have this trust base. So thank you, Popo, for inviting also friends, because it felt like we already had a warm atmosphere, probably many new people, but also some old connection. And I think this is necessary to have this trust base to come to this level of deeper sharing. Thank you, and please follow our upcoming events from the Border Crossing Program and the City Makers, and hope to see some of you at the next occasions.
And never forget to mention that our video is still available until 7 p.m. Until 11 p.m. tonight, and feel free to share before that to your friend if you like it. So, bye-bye. Have a good evening.
Bye, bye everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.